Welcome to my life. We're privileged to have Ernie Baker with us today. Ernie is a longtime Oxford area resident. I believe you've lived in Lake Orion since 1989 or
That's
so,
right? That's right.
Not only that, but Ernie's been around the block a couple of times. He was in the Army during World War II. He won the Bronze Star and he was awarded the Combat Infantryman Medal. He's also an advertising executive veteran for 52 years in the Detroit area, and one of your clients was the Detroit Tigers. We're going to talk about that. Not only that, but Ernie's been the commander of the VFW for 5 years, and he's been behind the Pearl Harbor Day festivities that we've had around here. We're so glad to have you with us.
Well, John, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. And you've been involved in so many other things. I mean, we were chatting off camera about some of the things you've had your fingers in, and there's very little you haven't been involved in these days. Tell us a bit, first let's start with the here and now. Tell us a little bit about the Pearl Harbor Day festivities and what.
Well, I think we're one of the few places that they still have a Pearl Harbor Day ceremony, and I wonder how long they're going to keep it up, because in our VFW post, when I first joined it, I would say probably close to half of the members were World War II veterans. And now I think we're maybe 5% because I think we only have 10 or 12 members left that are World War II veterans. And most of them are not in very good health. One of them, Leo Thomas, who survived the Bataan Death March, he's in a nursing home now. But he was a really interesting guy and worked for General Motors all his life after he got out of the service. And most of them really have some interesting stories to tell about their experience in World War II. In fact, most people that have been in the service have some interesting stories. But I enlisted when I was still in high school. I was a senior in high school, and I enlisted in the fall of 1943 in the Army Specialized Training Program. And as soon as I graduated from high school in the spring of '44, I went right into service and went to South Dakota State for, I think, 5 months and finished the course, the term there. Went to Camp Hood, Texas, and went through basic. And from there, well, they did away with the program because they felt they didn't need that many more engineers. And so I got on one interesting thing is that Sacagawea, who led the Lewis and Clark expedition, there's a statue of her in the middle of the campus at South Dakota State, because that's where she originally came from, that area of South Dakota. So I get to California and we march down to get on the troop ship, and I look up and it's the SS Sacagawea. I said, that Indian girl, I hope will watch over me like she did the Lewis and Clark.
And she did indeed, didn't she?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back a step further though. Tell me a little bit about where you came from.
Well, I grew up in Missouri, and actually I lived I was born in Sedalia, which is a town in the middle of the state. And my grandfather was in charge of a large estate near St. Louis called St. Albans Farms. And it covered over 7,000 acres along the Missouri River. And it's still there, but today it's an upscale. But this big estate was owned by the Johnson family of International Shoe. And they had 500 or 600 head of Guernsey cows. They supplied a lot of the milk to St. Louis.
Your grandfather was in charge of it?
He was the manager of it, and he hired my dad to come and be in charge of the grounds. It took about 60 men to operate this big farm, a big estate, because they had a big home up on a hill overlooking the Missouri River, like the Meadowbrook Hall. And it's still there, as a matter of fact. And then they had an inn where wealthy people in the St. Louis would come out, like the Bushes, and they could spend weekends, and they had a swimming pool and tennis courts and cottages and all that sort of thing.
Let's talk some more about your grandfather. Was he the first generation of your family to come to this country? Or
no, no, it goes way back.
Really?
Yeah, most of my relatives came from the British Isles. Baker is a Welsh name, but I have Irish, Scotch, English, and Welsh, actually, on both sides, my mother's side, dad's side. But anyway, we moved to this big estate, and my grandfather then went back to Sedalia because he had a florist nursery business. But we stayed there until 1940, and then my dad became manager of the Missouri State Fair. That's why we went back to Sedalia, and then I went to high school there. But my dad was a real, he started a Sunday school at St. Albans. He started a Boy Scout troop. He was one of those guys that was a doer, and I think because of his example. I
I'm
think
hearing
that's why.
two things from you.
Okay.
I'm hearing, number one, that your family has traditionally been big-time business people.
Well, I wouldn't say big time.
Well, very respectable business
Well,
people.
they worked hard, let's put it that way.
And number two, that you've been really involved in the community. That's
Well,
what
yes,
I'm
I
hearing.
have,
Is that
yeah,
about
yeah.
right?
Well, yes, I have, yeah.
Okay. How did your grandfather, tell me more about his history with
Grandfather Thomas?
business-wise?
Yeah,
Yes.
he had a large florist and nursery business, and his big business was at what used to be Decoration Day. It's now Memorial Day. But back then, everybody went to the cemeteries to take flowers and so forth. And he raised lots of glads and so forth. So their big business was around Memorial Day. But my dad worked for his grandfather and got to know a lot about the florist business and so forth. And in fact, then he studied landscape architecture, and that's how he got the job at St. Albans. And after my grandfather went back to his business, but he didn't live very long. He was pruning a tree and fell out of the tree and died as a result of the fall.
You're talking about your
My
grandfather.
Yeah. I remember him. I don't remember him very well, but I was maybe 6 or 7 years old when he died.
Okay, so what led them away from managing that large estate that you were referring to?
Well, my dad left there. He was in charge of the grounds. And
Okay.
in the wintertime, it was just himself and another man. But in the summertime, he had, I don't know, a dozen men or so working for him, because back then, lawnmowers were all push bores, and they had all these lawns around the mansion, and then had flowers and big beds of peonies. It was a beautiful estate.
And where was this again?
It's west of St. Louis. It's called St. Albans Farms.
Is it still there?
Oh yes, but the Johnsons all died out, and they closed it down during World War II. But during World War II, there were about 15 girls from England that spent the whole year in this mansion there with a teacher and so forth. So they were totally out of the war, but they were from wealthy British families and so forth. But then after the war, a group of men in Texas bought it, and they tore all the houses down and everything except for the inn. The inn is still there. It's a French restaurant now, but it became a real upscale community of homes, 500,000, and now with expressways, you can be downtown St. Louis within a half an hour from there. But when we lived there, it took, cars went 20 miles an hour. It took an hour or two to get from our house into St. Louis.
But tell me about Ernie Baker as a young boy in this setting.
Well, at St. Albans, my dad started a scout troop, and that was a big deal because we did a lot of things through scouting. And then when my dad became manager of the state fair, he started a statewide thing for his Boy Scouts. So all troops from all over the state came there and camped on the fairgrounds in Sedaya. It's a big lot of acreage. And then he'd have them work in the carnival and so forth to make sure the carnival guys weren't cheating and so forth. And we, of course, big kids, we didn't know whether they were cheating or not. But it was an interesting thing. My dad had a state camperies, I think what they called it. But those were kind of fun. We did that 2 years.
Okay, I want to talk more about Ernie Baker, his dad, and cheating at the carnival, but we got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Canine Stray Rescue is Oxford's own local dog rescue. Each year they take in hundreds of dogs and bring them into suitable homes. A certified nonprofit organization, Canine Dog Rescue strives to give pound dogs a new leash on life. To donate, adopt, or even volunteer, call them at 248-628-0435 or go to their website, dogsaver.org, and click on the Canine Stray Rescue League link.
Okay, so Ernie, your dad was in charge of the state fair
in Missouri.
in Missouri. Mm-hmm. So he's a pretty well-known guy.
Well, yeah, I suppose so, at that time.
And you were telling me about the involvement of the Scouts?
Well, my dad was really loved Boy Scouts. He never became an Eagle Scout, and he was really sorry, but he eventually got the Silver Beaver Award, which he was very proud of. That's for people that do a lot for scouting and so forth. And but he got that, and he was very proud of it. But he started a scout troop, and then, as I say, during the fairground, during the state fair, he'd have a state camporee, and scouts came from all over the state, and they would exhibit things like knot tying, and they would have all kinds of things they made. It was so people would go over there and walk through and see all the scouts. And it was a big deal for the scouts to spend 10 days there, camped out at the state fair.
Now, what was your mother doing during all this?
Well, my mother was big. She was a member of the Ladies' Garden Society in Sedalia, and enjoyed that sort of thing. And our home was right on the fairgrounds. In fact, I learned to drive a car driving around a racetrack. That's where I learned to. I took my driving
and
training.
You drove it very slowly.
Very
too,
slow,
right?
and the dust was flying all over the place.
Okay, tell me about the school you went to there.
Well, I went to the high school today. It's called Smith Cotton. It's there were 200 boys and girls in my class, and we grew up during the wartime, and it was a very serious time. And we did a lot of collected metals and grease, and even went out and picked those pods to make life preservers out of them.
Yes.
But everybody was involved in doing something in the war effort. And
did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have one brother who's 6.5 years younger than I am. And so we had a brother in between, but he died when he was quite young of pneumonia. So really it's just the two brothers and I. But after it was a good place to go to high school because it was a simple time. It's not like today. There was no television. Sunday nights you sat around and listened to the radio, and it just was totally different. Drugs didn't really. I mean, we didn't drink beer. If we got together, we drank pop. It was just a whole different lifestyle. And when I went back to my first high school reunion years later, I was surprised at how well many of them had done. One had been president of a steel company, and they were accountants, there were nurses, doctors.
But let me ask you something. It sounds like you mixed with a pretty high level of society with regard to what your parents' occupation was and so on and so forth. Did you go to, was the high school that you went to, was it just a regular public school?
High school, yeah.
Was it indeed?
Right, yeah, it was.
But it sounded like you had a pretty good mix of people.
Well,
there.
yeah, it was. There were a lot of good boys and girls. Most of us. Then after I was first a scout at St. Albans, then when we went to Sedalia, I joined a scout troop there. And interestingly, we had a summer camp down near Branson, Missouri. I don't know if you've ever been to Branson, but it's a huge entertainment complex today.
I'm sure that's changed a lot.
It's changed. I can remember one time going with a scoutmaster into Branson for some reason, maybe to get some groceries or something. There was just a little crossroads with a dime store and a hardware, and there was just nothing there. And then I went down there. I've been there 3 or 4 times over the years. The first time I went, I just couldn't believe it. I just thought this is unbelievable. It's a huge entertainment complex today.
What kind of thoughts went through your mind growing up during the start of World War II?
Oh gosh, that's so long ago. You're asking me to really go back. I remember Pearl Harbor vividly because it was a Sunday evening. My dad had dropped me off downtown. We lived about a mile and a half from downtown Sedalia. It's a small town. And I went to a Sunday afternoon movie, and my dad was supposed to pick me up, but he said, if I'm not there, walk home. And it was kind of a mild December 7th, 1941, and I walked home, and it was unusual. There was no traffic. It was just leaves fluttering on the sidewalk, and it was kind of eerie. And so I got home, and I walked in here with my mother and dad and my brother around the radio and listening to a report from Pearl Harbor that we'd been attacked. And then the next morning when I went to high school, we all, after homeroom, everybody went in the auditorium, and they had a little radio up on the stage and listening to Congress and President Roosevelt declaring war against Japan, and then they dismissed school and everybody went home from there.
You were in high school at
I was in
that
high
point.
school, yeah. I was a sophomore in high school.
But
you had the feeling, somewhere you're going to be involved in this thing.
What kind of thoughts about the future did you have as a high school student? I mean, it's kind of hard to focus on going to college and that sort of thing when there's a war going on and you don't know what lay ahead.
Well, not really, because you're right. I mean, you're more concerned about what's going to happen immediately with this war, because the whole world was involved in World War II. It affected every parts of the world. And I think you're far more focused on that than in college, although when I was a junior, I signed up to get this 2-year college education and got a year of college courtesy of Uncle Sam.
But was that after you got out of the service, or?
No, that was while I was in the service.
While you were in the service?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They had the Army Specialized Training Program. You were supposed to get 2 years of college, engineering, and then become an officer in the Army Engineers. And so I've completed. It was tough. There were 600 of us, and half of them were gone by the second term because they just flunked out. And then when we finished that, then we went to Camp Hood, Texas, and took basic. And then while I was at basic, they eliminated that whole program. So they just put all of us in the regular Army from that.
So they actually let you go to school for a while before even going to basic training.
Yeah, right.
That was a unique
But
program.
I was only 17 at that time.
Yeah, but you had just gotten out of high school.
Right.
And you got into that.
Yeah.
Okay. At that time, what was really your goal? What did you want to do?
Well, when my dad was manager of the State Fair, they had a young man who was in charge of advertising, public relations, and I used to visit with him occasionally, and his goal was to own a newspaper someday, in a small town like Oxford or Lake Orion, and it sounded like a pretty good life. And I thought, well, and Missouri has the very first journalism school in the world, and it's renowned. And I had an uncle that had gone through University of Missouri School of Journalism and worked for the St. Louis paper, and then became secretary manager of the St. Louis Cardinals after a few years. And so anyway, that was kind of a far off goal. And then anyway, we ended up in the Pacific. And then I took an exam for West Point while I was there, and and after the war ended, I was still on Mindoro, but.
So you were in the Pacific during the war while it was still going on?
Right, yeah.
Where were you in the Pacific?
I was on Leyte Island. Yeah.
Tell me what you were doing there.
Well, I was very fortunate because I went over on this troop ship, Sacagawea, and we landed. There's no dock at Leyte. The ships come into the bay, and then you have to go over the ship on these Jacob's ladders into ducks and go ashore. And then we went ashore, and the first thing we do was clear an area and start, how the Army is, you got to clean every damn thing up, the weeds and grass, and put up our tents. And we hadn't even dug foxholes yet, because this is in the spring of '45, and of course we knew there weren't any Japs in the area. So anyway, as soon as right after it got dark, the air raid siren went off. And so another guy and I went over sitting, there were great big coconut palm trees, and we're sitting there. Of course, you can't see anything, but about just a short distance away was a landing strip for these little pipers that they used, artillery used for spotters. And they had an anti-aircraft gun there. And this damn thing's going like boom, boom, boom. And the ground's trembling, and all of a sudden these damn coconuts start falling, and one of them just missed me. And this other guy and I said, we're gonna get killed by a coconut. So we got up and ran into a swamp and sat down and looked around. Here's guys everywhere just sitting around there trying to see what's going on.
Okay, we have to take a break from the coconut adventure for just a moment, but we'll be right back.
All right, but that's something I'll never forget.
A small town with a lot of heart and history. A hidden gem with a sense of community. Welcome to Leonard.
Hi everyone, don't forget you can purchase DVDs of your favorite shows from OCTV, whether it's Minutes by Minute, Our Community Access, or Connie's Kitchen. Just call the station. Our number is 248-628-9658. And enjoy watching all of our shows on OCTV.
Back with Ernie Baker. Ernie was telling us about his coconut adventure in the Pacific.
Yeah, that was.
But you ran into a special relative while you were over there.
Well, I did.
weren't
I was
you?
very fortunate. I was very fortunate for several reasons. I was assigned to the 96th Infantry Division, and they left to go to Okinawa, and they left all of us that were 18 years of age there because I think Congress or something decided you had to be 19 to be in combat. So we were lucky we got to stay, but we guarded Japanese prisoners and a huge food dump, and well, it had food and ammunition, everything you could think in it, even jeeps and so forth. But the only way you get news was to go down to your regimental headquarters, and they had a bulletin board, and they'd put a bulletin, because we didn't have radio or television or nothing, or phones, and they'd say that this and this had happened, and so I was standing there reading, and I hear someone call my name, and I turn around, it's an uncle of mine, and my uncle was, who just died last year, was only about 10 years older than me, but he got in the service in about might have been just before, about 1939, 1940, and he was at that time a master sergeant. So that's kind of the high guys in terms of as an enlisted man. So anyway, it was a real shock. But he, through Signal Corps, he had means of communication and found out where I was and actually looked me up. But I was quite a surprise to see him. But anyway, when I could get off, he would send his Jeep up to pick me up. He had his own Jeep. And I'd go down to his area, and they had a beautiful beach, and they'd bulldozed a baseball field out of the jungle, and we'd play a little pitch and catch and pickup game, and he had a tent with a concrete floor in it and a big parachute over the top of it to kind of cool it off and everything, and a cooler in the back with beer and steaks in it. And so they were living quite well, but master sergeants knew how to get all this stuff. So, but that was a real treat to go down there while it lasted, but then I got shipped out to another island.
This almost sounds like MASH 1, doesn't it?
Yeah, except that was famous in Korea.
So what was your next step then after the island?
Well, then I went to Mindoro. In fact, I was part of a task force of just 18-year-olds. There were 3 LSTLs. They loaded us on them. We first invaded an island called Panay, and there was no resistance whatsoever, because I think it was really more of a training exercise. But you go out the front end drops down, you go ashore, and it's pretty scary. But when you're that age, you don't think anything can happen to you. I mean,
was this just before they dropped the bombs?
Oh yeah, this is back in probably July. They didn't drop the bombs until August.
Okay.
And so, yeah, then we did the same thing on Mindoro. Mindoro is the 3rd largest island in the Philippines. And then we went ashore, and the Navy had really just virtually eliminated all the Japs on that island. There was hardly any resistance. And the ones that were left, they ran up to the mountains and hid, and they were there for years after World War II. And so then we went to work and had to clear a lot of areas and set up a lot of tents for our division. They came back from Okinawa, and when I rejoined my company, G, there was hardly anybody I recognized from Lady. A lot of them were killed and wounded on Okinawa. It was terrible. But I'm very thankful. But then we immediately started training for the invasion of Japan. And we were up every morning in calisthenics and shooting range, everything, just intensive training. And then they dropped the 2 bombs, and everything just stopped. Then we'd get up in the morning, have breakfast, play cards. It was just like turning a faucet on and off. I mean, once they dropped the bombs, everything stopped, because it was really the end of the war. But the truce, the final truce wasn't settled, I think, signed until September 6th.
What did you think of when you heard about the bombs?
I was grateful. I was grateful. I don't think I'd be here today if we'd had to invade Japan, because they figured they'd lose at least 1 million men, and the Japanese would lose 5 or 6 million people.
Did you finally get to go into Japan?
No. When I was on Leyte, I'd taken the exam for West Point, and the war ended in really early September. And then in November, I was called up to our general was killed on Okinawa of our division. And so we had a lieutenant colonel that was in charge. And I went up I was called one day to go up there, and he handed me all my papers. He said, "Congratulations, you've got an appointment to West Point." So next morning I started the long trip back, and I had a first alternate, and whoever was the first position, took it because I never did get a call. So I enrolled at the University of Missouri and went through the journalism school there, graduating.
Were you ever disappointed you didn't go to West Point?
No, my dad was. My dad was a mild-mannered man, but the only time I remember really having a serious argument with him was over West Point, because he would have been very proud of it. But I had already been in the Army 2 years, a little over 2 years, and I'd had enough.
Just out of curiosity, did your dad have any military experience?
No, he actually tried to sign up though, and but he wasn't taken.
Yeah. So you went to college for journalism.
Yes.
Did you finally get a degree?
Oh yeah, I graduated in May of 1948, and I worked for an uncle of a fraternity brother that summer, but I was engaged to get married. I met my wife Joan at my senior year, and we'd gone together all that year.
And what college did you go to again?
I went to the University of Missouri.
Of Missouri, so you were still in Missouri.
Oh yeah, and then she went to Christian College, which is in the same town. Columbia, Missouri is a big university town or a school town, because you've got the university, you've got Christian, you've got Stevens, and then nearby is Lindenwood, and there's also another little town nearby, a military school too. So there's a lot of schools in that area.
Okay, so you were going to a school of journalism. You were majoring in journalism. What were you hoping to do?
Well, again, it goes back to what I was going to hopefully graduate and work for a newspaper, follow a journalism career. But at the university, they own a newspaper. They have a daily newspaper, the Columbia, Missouri, and they have a radio station. And today they have a television station. And when you're going to school, then professional school, you have to work on one of those media for so many hours a day. And I worked on the newspaper, and I had a whole series of bad experiences. One was involved Errol Flynn, the old movie actor.
Yes.
Stevens has a drama school, and he was brought back to talk, to give a to these girls. I think Barbara Stanwyck was a graduate. That was their claim to fame. So on Saturday morning, I had to go down and interview this guy at the Columbia Hotel.
Errol Flynn.
Errol Flynn.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And I go up in his room, and he's laying in bed with this thing. He's got 3 or 4 bottles of beer. His breakfast is beer. And I'd ask him a question, and he was not a very nice guy. He really wasn't. So I didn't even keep a copy of this story. But I had a whole series of things happen. I said, this is not what I want to do. So my senior year, I took all the advertising marketing courses, and decided I'm going to go in the advertising business, not the newspaper business.
Did you get married right after college?
Yes,
or?
I did.
Okay.
I met my wife, and we got married in September, and then I started a week and a half later, I started at Zimmer Keller, an agency in downtown Detroit.
Is that what brought you to Detroit, the job?
No, actually, I had an offer of a job in St. Louis. And we went there. We went to Chicago on a honeymoon and down there. And but back then there was no air conditioning, and it was like 105 in St. Louis. And my wife said, "I'm not going to live here." So we packed up, came back to Detroit, and found a place to live, and got there were a lot of job opportunities right after the war.
Well, we want to pick up on that in our next episode here with Ernie Baker. This is just so fascinating, Ernie. Okay, we've got the military experience out of the way. Next is the Detroit experience, and I just can't wait.
Okay.
So please join us next time. Thanks for watching.
Your local business.
Your police department.
Your local business.
Your village of Oxford.
The schools. Your parks and recreation.
Your community.
Your community.
Only on OCTV.
You're watching OCTV, Oxford Community Television, serving Oxford, Addison Township, and the village of Leonard.